Let me warn you that I don't know how to be an entrepreneur. If I did, I wouldn't be here. It's not just being facetious to say that, because there is a real danger that folks listening to a lecture on entrepreneurship may be under the impression that this is a how to do it and how to be it type of lecture, but it's not. It's one thing to be an entrepreneur, but it's quite another thing to understand what entrepreneurs do and what their importance is for the economic system. And for better or for worse, I'm in the latter category. That is, I'm in the category of people who can who believe we can understand what it is the entrepreneur does, what his role is, what his function is, what his purpose is, what he achieves for the economy as a whole. But that's quite different from giving a list of instructions on how to be an entrepreneur. In fact, I've been involved, I've gotten myself into a bit of trouble from time to time criticizing some of the courses on entrepreneurship that are becoming fashionable around the country. I think it's great that entrepreneurship is becoming recognized around the country, but I think we have to be very careful before we push courses on entrepreneurship as if it were possible to teach entrepreneurship. It's not at all clear that anybody can teach entrepreneurship, and it's certainly not clear that we want to encourage people to become entrepreneurs who don't really have it. Okay, so that's by way of an aside. The title of my course, calm down. The title of my lecture is Competition and Entrepreneurship. And what really is happening here is that there are two lectures that are being spliced together into the one lecture. But even that is not quite the full story, because in fact I really only have one lecture ever to say. All my lectures are the same lecture, except sometimes I begin from the one end, and sometimes I begin from the other end, and sometimes I begin in the middle. But that all of my lectures are one lecture, and that is I lecture about the dynamic market process. Bumper mentioned that I had the privilege of studying under Ludwig von Mises, and the very first sentence that I heard Mises say, I remember it very well. It was in September of 1954, and I was a young graduate student and attended his seminar, and the first sentence that Mises said was, "The market is a process." I didn't know what on earth he meant by that. The market is a process. I knew what the market is. It's a place where you go and buy things. But he said the market is a process, and that was something totally new. And all of my lectures are simply explaining what that means, that market is a process. One way of explaining that the market is a process is by fastening onto the concept of competition and showing how the market is a competitive process. Another way of expressing the same idea is to explain that the market is an entrepreneurial process, and you focus on the entrepreneur. And sometimes you spice both of these together, and you give a lecture on competition and entrepreneurship, and that's what I'm going to try and do this morning. What is it that drives the market process? But by now, most of us understand, whether we're economists or laymen, we understand by now that the market achieves remarkable results. The market achieves economic progress, it achieves an efficient allocation of resources, it achieves the dynamism and growth that we've associated with the market economies. And that's pretty well understood. You just have to read the papers as to how even the Soviets are beginning to try and latch on to certain ideas of the market economy, and one recognizes that the achievements of the market are beginning to be appreciated. The question is, what is it that drives this process? How does it work? what is the economic mechanism? Mechanism is the wrong word, but it's difficult to come up with a better one. What is the economic nexus, the economic chain of events that in fact brings about the achievements of the market? We understand that that if the market achieves benign results, this is counterintuitive. It's surprising. It's something to write about. Man bites dog, because we wouldn't expect it to be that way. We wouldn't expect the market to achieve benign results, because the market consists of many individuals acting independently. And when individuals act independently, the natural expectation, the intuitive expectation, is that they're going to get in each other's way. Just imagine a busy traffic intersection without any traffic signals and without any rule of the road, just everybody trying to cross as fast as they can, and you realize there's going to be chaos, there's going to be blood on the streets. And the question is, well, why doesn't this happen in a market economy? Why is the market able to achieve economic order? Why is it able to achieve dynamic growth? Why is it able to achieve prosperity that is unprecedented in human history? Surely all of this requires a very delicate meshing of millions of activities, millions of actions. And how does it happen without any central direction? It is counterintuitive. My second lecture this morning, I'll be talking about the socialist calculation debate, where we go even further and we show not only is it possible for a decentralized economy to achieve these benign results, but it is only in the absence of centralization that this is possible, and that the centralized economic system is unable to simulate or duplicate the achievements of a market. Well, why is this? Why does all this happen? And there are, as I've indicated briefly, there are really two ways of approaching this question, and both are going to meet. The one way is to focus on competition, and the other was to focus on entrepreneurship. Let me start with competition. Let's go back to Adam Smith. Adam Smith understood the market, and he emphasized competition. And critics of the market who appreciate what Adam Smith wrote are able to wriggle out of the trap that they see being posed by Adam Smith. And they say, sure, Adam Smith demonstrated how a market economy can work. But remember one thing, they said, Smith was assuming competition. Whereas today, in today's capitalism, we have a world of big business. That's not competitive. Why? Just this morning, coming up on the train, I read a piece, an op-ed piece in the New York Times, saying deregulation of airlines has been somehow handled badly by the administration, because the administration has handled it as if deregulation meant what do they say, rambunctious laissez-faire, whereas in fact they say deregulation needn't necessarily mean that, because deregulation implies competition, and unfortunately, they said, we've had so many mergers that we don't have any competition anymore. Now this is the same criticism. The criticism that Adam Smith was right, but what he said has nothing to do with the real world capitalism of today, because capitalism of today is characterized by big business in which competition is absent. Now, what I'd like to make clear is that this criticism is totally wrong. It totally misunderstands what Adam Smith says, totally misunderstands what the nature of competition is, and really needs to be corrected. The term competition that's being used in this particular line of criticism that's being used in this op-ed piece that's in today's New York Times, the understanding of competition is a very narrow textbook meaning for the word that is most unfortunate. What usually happens in freshman courses in economics is something like the following. Pretty early on, the student sees that there's going to be a chapter in the book on competition. And the student feels pretty much at home with that idea, because after all, we live in a competitive world. We've known about competition in academics and sports, and we hear it from the family and business. We hear it's a competitive world. And so we figure that, the student figures that when we get to the chapter on competition, it's going to be, just setting down what everybody really knows already. In fact, when you get to the chapter, when the student gets to the chapter, the student begins to be a little bit uncomfortable. He begins to read that the competition that economists are talking about is not really the competition that they were used to hearing about ever since they can remember. In fact, when they think into it more carefully, it turns out that the competition that the economic textbooks are talking about is exactly the opposite of the competition that everybody else is talking about. That's a very unfortunate use of terminology. It's a very bad use of words, to be able to use words in exactly the opposite sense of what everybody else understands those words to mean. Well, if students get troublesome about this and start asking questions, the professor's likely to tell them, well, okay, you're studying economics. You pay tuition, now you're getting your money's worth. You're learning what the technical meaning of the terms are. Forget about what the word means outside. This is a technical meaning of competition. Even that doesn't really mollify the students, or shouldn't mollify the student, because, okay, economists are entitled to their own technical jargon if they want, but it's unfortunate that that jargon should mean exactly the opposite of what everybody else means by the particular term. Now, what does the economist mean by the term competition, and why is it an unfortunate use of the term? And why is it the exact opposite of what everybody else means by the term? For the economist, in the textbooks, competition means a state of affairs where there are so many competitors, right? So many buyers, so many sellers, that no one of them can have any impact on the market. Okay. Now, I want to try and be fair. I can understand how this term came into being. After all, if you have one seller, right, we call that a monopoly. So if you have more than one seller, you say there's some competition in the market. Well, you'd expect that if you have more and more sellers, it'll get more and more competitive. And if you have an infinite number of sellers, or an infinite number of buyers and sellers, then you've really got competition to the limit. You've got perfect competition. That's exactly what the economist says. Perfect competition is the state of affairs where you have an infinite number of buyers, an infinite number of sellers, where no one of them can make a difference. In the diagrammatics that economists are fond of using, we measure a quantity of goods that I'm trying to sell, and if we measure price of goods on the vertical axis, and you want to map out the quantities that I can sell at different prices, I ask myself, if I charge this price, how much can I sell? If I charge a lower price, how much can I sell? Well, ordinarily, you'd figure that if I charge a higher price, I'm going to be able to sell less. If I charge a lower price, I'm able to sell more, right? But in the case of perfect competition, I don't have any control over the number of people who are going to buy my product. I can charge the market price, or I can charge above the market price or below the market price. If this is the market price and I sell 1 penny at 1 penny above the market price, I will sell 0. If I charge the market price, I can sell as many as I want. Because I'm so small relative to the market, they're just infinitesimally small, there are an infinite number of buyers and sellers, that nothing I do is going to affect the available demand. So that at the market price, or even or anything less than that, I can sell an infinite amount. Above the market price, I can sell nothing. We call this a perfectly elastic demand curve that's facing me the seller. Okay. Now this is what perfect competition means, and if you'll think into it just for a moment, you'll realize that whatever the justification for the origination of the term, it's a state of affairs where nobody is competing. If everybody is charging $5 for the item, right? Everybody is charging that. Nobody's charging $5 and a penny because that'll be suicide, right? Nobody's bothering to charge to $4.99, because why should you charge $4.99 or $4.90 or $4.50 if you can sell as much as you want at $5? So under these circumstances, nobody is competing, not price-wise, and nobody is competing quality-wise, because the assumptions of the perfectly competitive market are that this is a homogeneous product. Everybody is selling the same product. So under these circumstances, there is no competition occurring, and that is perfect competition, and that is strange. Okay. So this is where we begin to see the confrontation between what everybody understands by competition, which is the circumstances where if you want to get ahead, you got to compete. And where if you're selling at $5 and the next day your customer says, I got a better price across town, and you cut your price, and then you hear that a competitor has introduced a whole new product line that customers are going for and leaving you altogether. That's competition. That's the world in which we live. Not here. Single product, homogeneous product, fixed price, fixed. Let me make clear, not by any government. Just the market has already reached its equilibrium, so that this is the market price, and at that price nobody is competing. Everybody is in a dead heat. Everybody's at the finishing line. So the competitive model, this is the perfectly competitive model, and this is taken as the ideal of competition. This ideal is an ideal where nobody is competing. When the authors of the op-ed piece in today's Times ask for competition, what they have in mind is the ideal where you have many, many little airlines flying from every place to every place. So that if you want to go from New York to St. Louis, you don't just fly TWA. You can fly. You've got a choice of 15 airlines. That's what they mean by competition. An infinite number of sellers, all of whom charging the same price. In fact, it was rather curious. Back in the around 1940, there was a congressional committee that was investigating monopolies in industry, and some of the industries which were really had a good deal of concerted effort to keep prices fixed, a good deal of conspiracy and getting together in smoke-filled rooms to settle on the price. They would blandly face congressional committees, and they would say, well, sure, there's just a single price. Sure, everybody's charging the same price. But isn't that what perfect competition tells us is going to happen? Right? That's exactly what you'd expect. We're a great, perfectly competitive industry. Everybody's charging the same price. That's not competition. Where everybody gets together and agrees to jack up the price. That's not competition. That's a cartelization. Now, if we say that the economy depends on competition, if we say that the market depends on competition, if Adam Smith was saying that the market depends on competition, what did Adam Smith mean? Adam Smith meant by competition what everybody outside the classroom, outside the textbooks means by competition. He meant a state of affairs in which rivalrous competition is actively occurring. Okay? Actively occurring. That's a competitive economy. Competition in this sense does not mean that everybody is doing the same thing. It does not mean that you've got a large number of buyers and sellers each selling exactly the same item at exactly the same price. It does not mean that at all. It means that you've got everybody on their toes looking over their shoulder It means a state of terror. Right? It's a state where everybody is scared. Everybody is scared that someone else may be doing something better than them. That's what competition means. It's not comfortable. It's not comfortable. A cozy world is a world in which you have monopolization. That's cozy. Competition, the competitive world, is a world in which you've got to be on your toes. It's trying to serve the customer better. Or if you're a buyer, trying to give a better opportunity to the seller. That's what competition means. And if the standard assumptions for competition are that you've got an infinite number of sellers, and the question is, okay, if that's not the kind of competition we want to talk about, if Austrians or Austrian economists want to talk about competition in a different sense, in the layman's sense, what is the requirement for competition in the layman's sense, in the Austrian sense? And the answer is, the requirement for competition is no privilege. No privileges. Or, put the same thing the other way around, it means freedom or free entry. Freedom of entry. Freedom of entry. Nobody is barred from entering. Now you shall think of it. If nobody's barred from entering, everybody's got to be scared that the other guy may enter. And if I'm scared that somebody else is going to enter with a better price and a better product than I have, what will I do? I will forestall entry by having a better price and a better product. Numbers are irrelevant. You can have one seller who's running scared because he doesn't want others to come in. He's afraid others will come in. That one seller will be running scared, keeping prices reasonable, keeping the product quality up, because he's scared if somebody can come in. If you can block entry, if you can put a protective barrier around your market, okay, then you've got monopoly. Then you've got monopoly. Barriers to entry. That's the meaning of absence of competition. Barriers to entry. Freedom of entry, that's what competition means. Barriers to entry, that's the absence of competition. What about so-called perfect competition? Where does that fit in? Well, perfect competition is a kind of a model. It's a model that developed as economists tried to formalize, to mathematize a state of affairs which might result as the concluding stage in a competitive process. Right? Remember, we started out by saying the market is a process. And then we said that process is a competitive process. Now that competitive process is a series of competitive acts, a series of competitive steps taken by competitors and potential competitors that force price down from the seller side, force price up from the buyer side as buyers compete, force quality into optimal directions, right? But it's a process. It's a process which might conceivably reach an end if we could sort of freeze outside change, if we could imagine that outside changes just didn't occur. Okay, suspend all outside changes, and just let this particular market that we're talking about, let that proceed until all possible competitive steps have been taken. Well then, we can imagine that when all possible competitive steps have been taken, the price will have been forced down to where? To the rock bottom. Where will be rock bottom? The cost of production. You can't cut prices below cost of production. The quality of the commodity would have been pushed up. The prices would be pushed up by buyers to meet costs of production. Costs of production themselves would have been minimized as entrepreneurs would have chosen the best ways of producing the given product. Okay, so you can imagine a state of affairs where, if in fact you could imagine this to have reached its conclusion, you'd arrive at a situation where the market is at equilibrium. Everybody's selling at $5 because that is the cost of production. Nobody's competing because there's nothing left to compete about. Well, but that's not a state of competition. That's a state where competition has stopped. Okay? That's not where a process of competition is going on. That's the situation where you would imagine the competitive process to have reached a halt. That's not a race. That's the finishing line where everybody stops running. Okay, so this is why we have these three extremes: sort of pure monopoly, where you have barriers to entry. I wouldn't say word pure competition, dynamic competition, okay, market competition where you've got freedom of entry, no privilege. Then you've got this never land of so-called perfect competition, which is no competition. It's certainly not monopoly, but it's not competition. It's a state of affairs where you can imagine the competitive process to have reached its final conclusion. But that's not going to be of any help in understanding the real world. And it's not an ideal that you want to achieve. You don't achieve that ideal by chopping up bigger airlines into smaller airlines, when in fact bigger airlines are more efficient. Okay. So this is the nature then of the competitive process. Now I've said that this process is at the same time an entrepreneurial process. Right. Until now, I've tried to avoid mentioning the entrepreneur. I think it slipped out a couple of times, but I've tried to avoid emphasizing what is entrepreneurial about this. But if you'll think into it for a moment or two, I think you will realize that this competitive process that we've been describing, this series of steps, price cutting, quality improvement, okay, these series of steps are each one of them entrepreneurial. The entry that we're talking about, the freedom of entry that we're talking about, is entry of new entrepreneurs. The absence of privilege we're talking about is absence of privilege for existing entrepreneurs vis-a-vis potential competitors. Okay? But the key figure here, who's going to be the competitor, is the entrepreneur. Now, this requires that we talk a little bit about what we mean by the entrepreneur. Now, as Bumper mentioned, there's been a lot written about the entrepreneur in recent years. I think the attention paid to the entrepreneur is a good thing. I think it's healthy for an economic system to understand how the system works and to appreciate what different functions are fulfilled by different kinds of individuals. I think that's good. And I think the entrepreneurial function is crucial. Not that I think the entrepreneur is a hero. There have been writings that represent the entrepreneur as a great moral ideal. That's not what I want to emphasize today. I don't necessarily see the entrepreneur as a moral hero. There have been writers going back to Joseph Schumpeter, a great economist of the first half of the century, who glorified the entrepreneur as a great heroic figure, great leader figure. That's not the kind of that's not the aspect of entrepreneurship that I want to emphasize. I want to emphasize the entrepreneur in a very prosaic sense. Whether he deserves glory or not is not my business. In fact, quite frankly, I don't believe he deserves particular glory. I think we ought to appreciate what he does. I think we ought to understand the harm we would do if we somehow stopped entrepreneurs from being active. But nothing that I say today about the entrepreneur depends on glorifying the entrepreneur as a hero. What do we mean by an entrepreneur? And how does entrepreneurship differ from any other economic activity? There's an important theoretical point here. If you study economics, textbook economics, you'll learn pretty early on that a crucial unit of analysis is the decision, deciding. Efficient decision-making is crucial to all microeconomic analysis, all price theory, all analysis of activity of the firm. Buyers' decisions, sellers' decisions, resource owners' decisions, all of these are decisions. And the Economist has gotten the analysis of the decision down to quite an exact science. And the decision The structure of the decision in the textbook is something like the following. Supposing you come into the supermarket. You've got $50, which you plan to spend. You don't have a clear picture of exactly what you're going to walk out of the supermarket with. You're going to spend $50. You do have, according to this theory, a very clear idea as to how you rank every commodity on the supermarket shelves. You've got a clear picture in your mind or in your pocket of every item in the shelves. You know exactly how much of your family likes it. You know exactly how much one particular item is desired more eagerly than the next item. Okay. What you don't know is what today's prices are. So you go into the supermarket and you look. Okay, you walk into the supermarket, immediately you're imagined to know all the prices of all the items on the shelves. It's quite a bit of research, right? But just imagine that you get that research done in a split second. Okay? Now you're in the supermarket, you know exactly what you want, you know exactly the prices of everything you want, you know what you got to spend. The rest is a matter of calculation. You calculate how to distribute that $50 among the thousands of items on the shelves so as to maximize the satisfaction of your family. That's how a decision is made, according to the textbooks. So now imagine, I like to put it this way sometimes, supposing we decide we're going to call this room the decision-making room. This is where people come in to make their decisions. Okay? And a fellow knocks on the door, wants to come in and make, he understands this is a place where you make decisions. Sure, come right in. You got your equipment ready. So he's a little bit, well, what do you mean my equipment? Well, you have to know what your resources are, corresponding to $50. You got to know exactly what you want, right? You have to know exactly what everything costs, and then come right in and make your decision. In fact, you know, the fellow at the door says, if you want, you don't even have to bother to come in. Just leave us the data, okay? And we'll run them through the computer, and we'll have the answer for you in a few minutes. So you go off someplace, have a coffee, and come back in 10 minutes, and we'll give you your decision. Now that way of imagining decision making is a little bit odd, because in ordinary life, when you talk about making a decision, we usually understand some kind of agonizing decision making, some kind of choosing. You sit and you wonder, well, should you do this or should you do that? Should you get married? Shouldn't you get married? Should you get married to A, B, or C? Should you go to law school? Shouldn't you go to law school? Should you go to law school or medical school? Should you start a business? Shouldn't you start a business? Well, now just imagine feeding the data into this decision-making room, where you've got to decide whether to get married or not, whether you've got to decide whether to go to law school or not, you've got to decide whether to open up a hardware business or not. You can't allocate anything because you've got to decide, right? If you're deciding on whether you're going to start a hardware store in one town or another town, if you want to decide where you're going to live, you're not allocating resources among known alternatives on given terms of exchange, which is what you have in the supermarket example, right? You're sitting down and wondering what kind of market for hardware, for the hardware business, will there be in this town over the next 10, 20 years? What kind of market will there be in this place for the next 10 or 20 years? What kind of, you're looking at this person, how will that person look after 20 years if you sort of think you're getting married to her, right? What will the law business look like in 20 years if you decide to go to law school? What will I look like in 20 years if I decide to go to law school? Those are the questions you're asking yourself. Can a computer help you on that? Those are the decisions you've got to make. That's what deciding means in everyday life. So what's gone wrong? What is it that's gone wrong in the Economist concept of a decision and the day-to-day, everyday meaning of the word decision-making that surely does correspond to our understanding of the term? What has happened, I think, is as follows. The Economist is not to be blamed. The Economist has filtered out of decision-making a certain aspect of it that can, in principle, be put within the scope of the computer. Be calculated. That's fine, because an aspect of our decision making is calculative. We do, at some point in our decision making, have to allocate given resources among different alternatives, like in the supermarket example. But the real decision that you make in the supermarket when you're wondering what should you buy is not if you're making the right calculation, but you're wondering, will your family like this particular brand, or will they like that? Do they want cheese or do they want fish? That's what you're deciding. And you're agonizing over that because you don't really know the future. You don't know what they're going to come up with. You don't know what the reaction's going to be. Exactly. So that's where decision is made. That's where decisions are made. You don't know what the future is going to hold exactly, but you've got to decide. You're driving along a road, and it's not a nice, clear summer day where you can see for miles ahead. It's a dark, foggy night. And you've got to decide. You've got to decide where to drive, how to drive, what speed to drive. You've got to get ahead. Because to stand still is no solution either. Somebody might ram you from the back. So you've got to move ahead. You've got to look in the darkness ahead of you. You've got to try and see where you're going. That's what decision making is about. Now, what's this got to do with the entrepreneur? Every real life decision has a computer aspect to it, a calculative aspect to it, and it has an entrepreneurial aspect to it. The entrepreneurial aspect of a real life decision is that aspect of the decision where you're deciding what it is you've got to choose between. You see, the model that we gave earlier of the supermarket example was a model in which you assumed everybody knows everything. You know exactly what's on the shelf. You know exactly what your family likes. You know exactly what the prices are. Then you just got to calculate. The real content, the entrepreneurial content of a decision, is to decide what exactly you're choosing between. That's the entrepreneurial aspect of a decision. When a businessman makes a business error, a bad mistake, and you look back and you say, gee, what did I do wrong? I made a bad decision. I made a wrong decision. What do you mean by that? Do you mean you make a mistake and you made a mistake in arithmetic? You mean your computer somehow gave you kicked out the wrong answer? No, that's not what you mean. You mean you fed in the wrong data into the computer. That's what you mean. You figured wrong. You open a hardware store in a place where nobody buys hardware. You went to law school in a country where nobody litigates. Not this country. Right? I won't even talk about the marriage example, right? That's where you make a mistake, right? You made a mistake where you assessed the future wrongly, right? You got a wrong picture of what you were choosing between. That's a business mistake. And what is a correct decision? A correct decision is one where you saw correctly. You saw right. You saw what the future held, more or less. Nobody's not a PhD in prophecy, right? But you can peer ahead and have a hunch for the future and act. And if you act right, if you're an entrepreneur, that means you see things right more of the time than you don't. When I said earlier that I'm not an entrepreneur, it's because I'm not very good at looking ahead and seeing what the future holds. Okay. But we're all entrepreneurs, don't misunderstand me. Every one of us is an entrepreneur. We all drive ahead. We all make decisions for the future. None of us stays put because we're so terrified of the future that we're paralyzed into motionlessness. We make decisions. We step off the curb. We get out of our houses. Right? Sometimes we take an umbrella, sometimes we don't. Sometimes we make a mistake by not taking the umbrella, sometimes we make a mistake by taking the umbrella. And sometimes we're right by taking the umbrella, and sometimes we're right by not taking the umbrella. But we get out of the house, and we make decisions, and we live, and we get married, and we have kids, and we engage in business, because we're entrepreneurs, every one of us. The pure entrepreneur, the entrepreneur that's understood as the businessman entrepreneur, he's an entrepreneur whose business it is purely to look at the future. Let me give you an example of pure entrepreneurship. If I can buy a commodity at 5 and sell it today or tomorrow or next year at 10, and the 5 includes all the costs that I have to pay in order to be able to deliver the commodity when I sell it, and I can sell it for 10, I'm an entrepreneur. I see the future right. I can buy at 5 and sell at 10. That's a pure entrepreneur. If I can produce something by buying resources for 5, okay, turning those resources into a product that I can sell for 10, I'm an entrepreneur. I saw it right. I can create a product worth 10 by buying resources worth 5. Why am I able to do this? Why am I able to find a difference between 5 and 10? Because I see something which other people didn't see. If other people saw what I see, if I didn't have the superior foresight, if other people were equally as insightful and foresightful as I am, nobody would sell to me at 5 something that they could sell for 10. Nobody would pay 10 for an item that they could buy for 5. And that's true if I'm buying and selling the same commodity, or I'm buying resources and selling a product. If I can put together a product for 5 and sell it for 10, nobody would pay me 10 for it if they could put it together for 5 themselves, including all costs. And if I am able to put the product together for 5 and sell it for 10, it's because I see something which other people didn't. Entrepreneurship it consists of that pure element. It's an analytical concept. The pure element of seeing better than others. That's entrepreneurship. What does this got to do with competition? He said an entrepreneurial process is a competitive process. A competitive process is an entrepreneurial process. What do you mean by that? Why is this particular element, this entrepreneurial element, why is that essential and necessary and central to the competitive process? Well, remember we talked about free entry. I remember when I studied under Mises in the 50s, he used to think back to days of the turn of the century. And at that time he said, people used to say, nobody can compete with the railroads. Railroads provide transportation links between major cities, and once you've got a railroad, no way of competing with a railroad. It doesn't pay to build another railroad another line parallel to the first. So every railroad is a monopoly. That's what they used to say, Mises said, and they were wrong. Because in the 50s and later the railroads were in pretty poor shape. Not only had people competed with them, but they had almost driven them off the economic map. Because people had innovated in bus transportation, truck transportation, air transportation, right? And these, of course, had eroded the railroads' control, quote unquote, control over the market. Competition took the form, not of everybody doing the same thing. That's not competition. Competition took the form of new ideas competing with old ideas. Truck transportation, bus transportation, air transportation, these are different than railroads, but competed with railroads. Competition does not consist of a single product. Competition consists of entry of new products, as well, of course, of the same products. If that's fine, that's included too. But it's certainly not confined to competitive entry of the same product. It's likely to take the form of competitive entry of different products. Who initiates and innovates new products? The entrepreneur. Entrepreneurship is competitive. It's entry. Entry of someone who sees an opportunity and grabs it. An opportunity that you see has been overlooked by others. Because if you see an opportunity that would not exist if others had seen it already, so once an opportunity has been seen, it's grasped. So if you see an opportunity, what does that mean? It means that others haven't seen it. You're the entrepreneur. If the railroads were providing transportation, and you see an opportunity to open up a little airline, if you're right, your perception is the perception of an opportunity which others have overlooked. You're an entrepreneur, you're entering. Now, if your entry is blocked, if the railroads have privileges, then your entrepreneurial vision won't get a chance. If entry is free, you're free to risk your money. You may be wrong, don't misunderstand me. Not every entrepreneur makes money. Entrepreneurs make losses a lot of the time. And the reason why they make losses is because they see things which ain't there. Not that they see better than others, they see worse than others, possibly. But if they're successful, it's because they see better than others. And it's only because they're free to enter that they can possibly see the right things and avoid seeing the wrong things. Entrepreneurial entry provides competition. It always consists in new ideas. New ideas may be limited to minor things. You know, I mentioned Schumpeter earlier, and I mentioned his idea of the heroic entrepreneur. And the classic case that Schumpeter was thinking about was, in fact, the entrepreneurs who introduced the railroads, who pushed out the stagecoaches and brought in the railroads. They are the great pioneers of the 19th century. He was thinking of the big guys, the guys who replaced railroads by air transportation. Great technological revolutions. I'm not denying the entrepreneurial element in those great entrepreneurial steps. But the kinds of entrepreneurship I'm talking about can include much more modest, less heroic types of entrepreneurship. Supposing there's 2 supermarkets in a suburban area, and one of them decides that it might be able to win customers by keeping longer hours. So instead of staying open from 9 to 5 or from 8 to 8 or from 6 to 8, it stays open from 4 in the morning till 2 the next morning. Or supposing the other guy comes back and keeps his store open 24 hours around the clock. Or supposing the one supermarket installs better lighting, or installs free parking, or innovates by putting a security guard on duty at the parking lot to enhance the safety of the customers. Or supposing it gives free delivery. These are competitive elements, right? Not revolutionary, not grand heroic elements, but they are the way in which businesses compete with each other for customer loyalty, for customer attention, and so forth. Supposing you tell your sales help to smile more frequently, or to smile more sincerely, or to pretend to do so, at least, right? Okay, and maybe that'll bring in the customers. Okay. The point is, entrepreneurship consists of entering, coming in with a new idea. Cutting price is an entrepreneurial decision. It's a decision that consists in changing the array of alternatives available to the people you're dealing with. You're offering them a new alternative. Advertising is a way of catching the consumer's attention. If you're an entrepreneur selling exactly the same thing as the next guy is, but you're able to bring to the attention of the consumer more effectively what it is that you have to serve the consumer with, you're a more effective vendor, you're a more effective producer. You're doing something which is in the interest of the consumer. So the entrepreneur, because he's free to do this, is able to enter and improve matters for the consumer. This is what the entrepreneurial process is. It is a competitive process. Every entrepreneur is competing. And every entrepreneur, provided there's freedom of entry for others, is under the gun, under the competitive gun. The series of steps that are taken in a market are competitive steps. They are entrepreneurial steps. The entrepreneurial process is the competitive process. The competitive process is the entrepreneurial process. And if we ask, Why is it and how is it that the market works? How is the market able to work? Why is it able to achieve what it's able to achieve? The answer is, it's because of freedom of entry. Or, to put it in brief, freedom. That's all. A free market works because it's free. Free here means nobody has any privilege. Everybody operates within the constraints of their property rights. Right? If you've got an idea, you are free to try it out. Do you need resources to be an entrepreneur? In principle, you do not. This is an important point. Let me just dwell on it for a moment. If you've got an idea, you can buy it $5 and sell it $10. Do you need $5? Not really. Not really. What you really need is to know somebody who'll lend you $5, right? Or, if you're fast enough, to pay the $5 when you get the 10. Right? Right? You don't need any money to be a pure entrepreneur. You don't need to be a capitalist to be an entrepreneur. There has to be a capitalist somewhere in the market. Someone has got to. If there's a gap in time between the time you buy your resources and the time the product is sold, somebody's got to carry the capital costs. Somebody's got to be the capitalist. In which case you may be borrowing money from the capitalist, or you may be a capitalist yourself, or the input owners may be your capitalist. If you can get your workers to get paid at the end of the week instead of the beginning of the week, then you can work. Then they're the ones who are extending the capital, right? They're working, they're producing. You sell to the customers and pay wages to your workers. The workers were your capitalists. They were extending credit. You've got to have a capitalist, but the entrepreneurship has nothing to do with being a capitalist. Naturally, if you're a capitalist, it makes it easy for you. You don't have to knock on anybody's door. You don't have to put in a tie to borrow money. You can use your own capital, right? You don't need resources to be an entrepreneur. Anybody can be an entrepreneur, provided what? Provided it's free to enter. No resources are required to be an entrepreneur. Anybody can be an entrepreneur under a free market, within the scope of property rights, which means you can't enter my house and say freedom of entry. You can't enter my store and say freedom of entry is going to be, and you're going to start selling my merchandise. That's not what freedom of entry means. Freedom of entry means that within the limits of your own property rights, within the limits of the promises you yourself make, you are free to enter, to buy, and to sell. And nobody can stop you. Nobody can say you can't open an airline here because you don't have a license. Nobody can say you can't open a liquor store here because you don't have a license. Nobody can say you can't practice medicine here because you don't have a license. Freedom of entry. Naturally, consumers may prefer that some people have licenses. They may prefer that doctors who are going to perform brain surgery have licenses. That's because the consumer wants it, not because anybody's blocking the freedom of the entrepreneur to enter. Okay? So it's a freedom of entry that constitutes the necessary condition for competition and the necessary condition for entrepreneurship. It's the entrepreneurial competitive process that drives the market and that constitutes the market. And that, I believe, is what Mises meant when he said in September 1954 that the market is a process. Thank you very much.